Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the council public meeting for Wednesday, May the 18th at 7:30. I'm Mayor West. Before we begin, we have received regrets from Councillor Munch and Councillor Liu for tonight's meeting. So welcome everybody to the council public meeting for tonight. In accordance with Section 26 of the Planning Act, this meeting constitutes the special meeting of council as prescribed by the Planning Act when the city is undertaking an update to its official plan. The meeting is held as an electronic hybrid meeting held pursuant to Section 238, 3.3 of the Municipal Act 2001. City facilities are open to the public to attend council and committee meetings beginning on March the 22nd, 2022. The public can observe meetings of council and committee by attending in person or by viewing the live stream of the open session part of these meetings, which can be accessed on the city's website, richmondhill.ca, or the city's YouTube page, linked from the city's homepage. If a person or a public body does not make an oral submission at a public meeting or make written submission to the city of Richmond Hill in respect to a proposed official plan amendment, the person or public body is not entitled to appeal the decision of City Council to the Ontario Land Tribunal and may not be added as a party to the hearing of an appeal before the Ontario Land Tribunal unless in the opinion of the tribunal there are reasonable grounds to do so. The purpose of tonight's meeting is to hear comments regarding the proposed city-initiated amendments to the official plan. It is understood that these amendments are the first in a series of amendments that the city will be undertaking in order to complete its update to the official plan. Planning staff will first provide an overview and describe the proposed amendments. Delegations will then be called upon to speak in the order that they appear on the agenda, followed by any members of the public attending in person who wish to speak. As a reminder to all electronic delegations, please make sure your microphone is not muted before you begin speaking. Every delegation will be provided 5 minutes to speak. A warning bell will sound when you have 1 minute remaining, and then again when your time is up. So, with that being all said, I'd like a motion from members of council to adopt the agenda for this evening's meeting. Councillor Chan, so all those in favor? Oh, sorry, I need a seconder. My apologies. I was just testing you, Mr. Clerk. Thank you for being on your toes. Seconder, Councillor Barros, all those in favor? Opposed? That carries. Thank you. So are there any disclosures of pecuniary interest in the general nature thereof? Councillor Barros?
No conflict, but my question was, I only see 3 of us on the screen. Are there more people in the chambers that you didn't announce?
Yeah, we have 1 member here in the chambers, Councillor Shepherd, and I think Regional Local Councillor Pirelli is here tonight, but he's audio only.
That would be correct. Thank you.
When we just voted, you said it passed, but I didn't hear anyone outside of the 4 of us, assuming Councillor Shepherd voted yes.
She did.
So that would be 4 of us with a yes. Did Councillor Pirelli or Silovitz indicate their vote?
No, they did not, but we have 4 people that passes.
Okay, very good. I just didn't hear that there was someone else in the chambers. That was then, I guess, your mistake in not announcing it. Thank you.
I don't think it's a mistake, Councillor. I'm chairing the meeting and I've counted the votes, but thank you very much, though.
Well, I've repeatedly asked you, Mr. Mayor, at the beginning of the meeting for the sake of the public, because they can only see you on the screen. I've asked you numerous times to announce who is in the chambers. So that's what I referred to as a mistake. I apologize if you misunderstood what I was saying.
Okay, well, I apologize if you misunderstood as well, but thank you very much. So scheduled business, we have SRPI 22054, request for comments, draft official plan amendment 18.3, vision and city structure. So I understand, Mr. Clerk, that staff will be making a presentation before we get underway with that. And I see Andrew Crawford on the screen. So Andrew, go ahead when you're ready.
Thank you. If I could just get a presentation available. I see you coming up now. Thank you very much. All right, so thank you and good evening to members of council as well as to everyone attending this evening. I'm here to speak on Official Plan Amendment 18.3, focusing on vision and city structure. Next slide, please. So OPA 18.3 is a first step in the city's official plan update and will form the foundation and groundwork for all of these subsequent amendments to come as part of the update. It proposes to insert our 2041 vision as expressed in the key directions report into the official plan and will update the planning horizon out to 2041. The OPA is also intended to clarify the city's intensification hierarchy, formalize the mobility hierarchy, introduce new council endorsed targets, and provide policies that support the achievement of these targets. The OPA addresses 23 directions from the key directions report. And while I'll attempt to address as many of the key changes in OPA 18.3 as possible in this presentation, I will further encourage everyone to review the draft document, which is attached to the agenda for this meeting or available on the city's website to see all of the proposed changes. Next slide, please. So the first change in OPA 18.3 is to update the vision and horizon of the plan. The vision statement is up on the screen, and if you've been following along, I'm sure it's quite familiar to most of you by now. The preambles and the policies of the official plan will also be updated to reflect the new vision, as well as to provide more clear language to communicate, support, and implement the updated vision. Next slide. To help implement this vision, OPA 18.3 will update and replace the current Schedule A1 in the official plan. To follow along with the updated vision, the schedule will be renamed from urban to city structure, recognizing that the schedule affects the entirety of the city, not just the urban areas within it. Title of Chapter 3 will also be renamed from building a new kind of urban to city
Andrew,
building.
I'm sorry, can I just pause you for a second? It would appear that we have lost quorum, so just give us a second here.
No problem.
Councillor Silovitz is in attendance.
Councillor Silvitz, you're going to do audio only, I presume. Is that correct?
Audio only, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. Okay, Mr. Clerk, we're okay? Okay, sorry, Mr. Crawford, go ahead.
No problem. So jump back where I was. So the title of Chapter 3 will also be renamed from building a new kind of urban to city building, again, to reflect that the chapter policies apply citywide. Some of the changes on the proposed city structure include adding 2 new local centers at Bathurst and Highway 7 and East Beaver Creek and Highway 7, as well as redesignating and expanding the area at Newkirk and Beecher Mackenzie as a local center. The regional corridor is proposed to be extended north along Yonge Street to Bloomington, updating the employment land mapping, recognizing 2 minister zoning orders, and adding higher order transit infrastructure onto the schedule, which would include 2 potential GO stations located at Yonge and 16th and Elgin Mills and Newkirk. Next slide, please. So in accordance with key directions, OPA 18.3 will provide more language and direction to support the intensification hierarchy, which is shown on the screen. The hierarchy helps prioritize where growth and supporting infrastructure is to be directed in the city. The Richmond Hill Center as a regional center continues to be at the top of the hierarchy, while at the bottom, the hierarchy will continue to recognize the limited growth potential that exists within the neighborhoods, which will mostly occur through infill development and additional residential units. Next slide. OPA 18.3 will also look to formalize a mobility hierarchy, again shown on the screen. This proposed mobility hierarchy prioritizes walking and active transportation at the top, followed by transit for longer distance trips, while single occupant vehicles are at the very bottom. Preference for electric vehicles is expressed for the bottom half of the hierarchy, which will help support our greenhouse gas emission reduction targets. The hierarchy was developed by our transportation planning staff through their work to update the transportation master plan, which is happening alongside of the official plan update. It was developed with broad consideration for multiple factors, including but not limited to traffic congestion, traffic safety, transportation equity, public health, and climate change. Next slide. OPA 18.3 implements a number of actions related to the city's affordable housing strategy, including a policy to require new high-density buildings to provide a minimum of 5% of their units having 3 or more bedrooms, This will help diversify the city's housing stock and create more family-sized housing. Next, the OPA proposes to further reinforce the protection of existing purpose-built rental housing within the city by preventing its demolition or conversion, subject to certain criteria. Any existing rental units that are deemed as affordable will have to be replaced by similarly affordable units. And finally, there's a new policy that will encourage all public agencies to prioritize any surplus public lands or buildings to make sure that they are used for affordable housing, as long as these properties are not needed for other public agency uses. Next slide. OPA 18.3 will also add a new section, number 3191, focused on infrastructure alignment. This section would require that the infrastructure necessary to support the future residents, businesses, and users of any new development must either be in place or identified in the city's or region's 10-year capital plan or development charges background study before any of these new development applications that require this infrastructure can be approved. We're also proposing to update the policies to recognize our Urban Master Environmental Servicing Plan, which was introduced and adopted since the official plan was adopted, and streamline some of the policies surrounding the requirements for MESPs. And as well, the official plan amendment adds a policy that would permit private development above or below public streets and identifies any of the conditions that will be required for the city to approve such an arrangement. Next slide. So moving on to climate change and sustainable design. A lot on this slide, but to start off, a new paragraph in Chapter 2 will recognize climate change and identify the need to adapt and to mitigate the effects of a changing climate. New targets related to 2 council-approved plans are being added. First, from the Community Energy and Emissions Plan will be a target to achieve net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. And from the Urban Forest Management Plan, targets to raise the city's forest canopy from 25 to 30% and add a woodland cover target of 15% to be achieved by 2041. Both of these targets will be recognized as well in the monitoring section of the plan. To support the greenhouse gas emission reduction target, the plan's energy conservation targets are being modified to acknowledge and encourage the use of renewable and alternative energy systems and to work with development proposals to implement them in certain areas or where it's feasible to do so. Many of the policies in the sustainable design section will also be updated to reflect that we have implemented the sustainability assessment tool and that it's currently being used to evaluate development proposals. Many of the more technical requirements surrounding energy and sustainable design policies are being removed through this official plan amendment, mostly because they're now covered by the tool. As well, many advancements in technology and building code requirements have led to some of these requirements being outdated. And finally, to support the development of urban agriculture, more permissions on community gardens, rooftop gardens, and vertical agriculture are being added. Next slide. On the subject of urban design, many of the policies in section 341 are being updated to respond to emerging urban design trends, specifically those supporting the interconnection of the public and private realms and improving walkability, connectivity, and placemaking. Some of the policy changes include promoting a city pattern, creating gateways, emphasizing views and vistas of important landmarks into the greenway system. Policies surrounding public art will be updated to align with the regional official plan as well as the city's own public art policy. Linking back to the new mobility hierarchy, additional policies will be added in this section to focus on walkability and maximizing pedestrian comfort and safety. Bicycle supportive policies will also be inserted to support cycling and other active transportation policies. An updated policy will permit above-grade parking in areas with a high water table or that have other extenuating circumstances, and will also provide design conditions to support this type of use, such as requiring active uses on the ground floor and design elements to shield the upper levels. And finally, the policies on how the angular plane is to be used to provide transition between the low density built form to the adjacent centers and corridors will be clarified. Next slide. And to wrap up the changes, this is the last one on the actual changes, I promise. There are a couple more policy modifications related to parks and other technical matters. So the OPA adds destination parks and urban plazas as 2 new park typologies to the plan. References to the Oak Ridges Corridor Park will be updated to its official name of the Oak Ridges Corridor Conservation Reserve. Another update is to clarify that live-work units and home occupations will be permitted anywhere within the centers of corridors, which will align with the work in OPA 18.4, which we'll hear about later tonight. And finally, a definition of secondary plans will be added just to clarify that any references in the plan to the words secondary plans can be achieved through amendments integrated into the official plan. Next slide. So summarizing this phase of public engagement, the draft official plan amendment was released publicly back on April 7th, and a public open house was held on April 26th. Our team is currently taking in all of the feedback we've received both from today's meeting and the open house last month, as well as all of the emails, comments, and submissions we've received to date. Following tonight's meeting, we'll be summarizing all the feedback we've received, and we will be making changes to the OPA based on this feedback. We plan to bring forward the final official plan amendment for adoption at the special council meeting scheduled on July 27th. And after adoption, it will be sent to York Region, who is the approval authority for this official plan amendment. Next slide. And finally, to close out the presentation, the recommendation from the staff report is that all comments be referred back to city staff for consideration. So that was a very quick run through the official plan amendment. Thank you for your attention, and our team will be happy to address any questions from members of council.
Thank you very much, Mr. Crawford. That was indeed a quick tour through a complex document, so I appreciate that. So we have a number of pieces of correspondence related to this topic, and we have 2 people registered for delegations. The first person that we have is Mr. Chapnick, who is actually with us live and in person in all 3 dimensions. So Mr. Chapnick, if you'd like to come up and speak, you've got 5 minutes to address council.
Okay, let me just, before I do, I got to work out the technical details of how to use this. How do I use this? Like, how do I know what's being projected and what's not projected? So if I go like that, what's that? It'll appear sideways. Yes. So it's got to go like that. Is it appearing? It's not. Oh, I see. Oh, I see. There's a window. Okay. Okay, that's better. Now I can kind of see it. Yeah. Okay. Okay.
Welcome, Mr. Chapnick. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So I want to thank you for the opportunity to be here tonight. I want to thank planning staff as well for the opportunity to meet with them. Our group did meet with them about a week ago, and we expressed some of our concerns with OPA 18.3. To start with, it's interesting how the key directions are quite accessible in terms of the public being able to read them, but these OPA are not. They're very difficult to read, very difficult to understand and sift through. And you have to go and almost reconstruct a red line document, which must have been generated in order to make these changes. And yet that document is not circulated to the public. So we've asked planning staff to consider circulating to the public a different format that lets people understand the implementation. This is going from the concepts which are in the key direction report to the implementation. And it's important that we understand, have these been implemented properly? So we've spent a lot of time trying to understand that question. Have these visions or concepts been implemented properly? In many cases, they have been. In some cases, we believe they have not been. So we've put a letter to the planning department that expresses some of our concerns with the implementation of these changes to the policies. Some of them are vision statements that we believe are fairly poorly worded, and they degrade the quality of the official plan accordingly. And we've had that discussion with the staff. They say they are going to take it back, relook at some of those statements and possibly reword them. The main thing that I wanted to talk about this evening is the angular plane policy. What was just described by Mr. Crawford is that there is clarifications to the angular plane policy being put into the official plan. He doesn't say that there's changes. He says that there's clarifications, which is actually not true. He also mentioned transitions to existing neighborhoods and making sure that neighborhoods transition appropriately to centers and corridors. Actually, that would be nice if they did. And if we look at the existing angular plane policies, which is what's shown here, when there's no street in between. Oh, is my camera not working now? It's all blurry. What? Put it back. Ah, there we go. So this is what's in the existing policy, which requires a 45-degree angular plane measured from grade at the property line adjacent to a neighborhood when it's adjacent to a corridor or center. And you can see that what the built form had to do in the central corridor to achieve that angular plane was to terrace the building from a lower level to a higher level and to step it back a little bit from the property line, because you can't have any height at the property line. It has to push back a little bit. So you end up with this little zone here, which is a little place that you could do some landscaping or something to affect that transition and that buffer to the neighborhood. The planning department, or elements of it, seem concerned with this right side. Well, that means that we can't push a building right up against the property line that's that tall. And I thought, yes, that's the idea of a transition, is that you can't push something up that's very tall right up against the property line. So the so-called clarification that this official plan wants to implement is to, oh, sorry, no, I can't do that. I have to do it this way, is to create this, which is to allow for a 10-meter height at the property line from which the angular plane is then measured. So they want to be able to go up 10 meters and then start measuring the angular plane, which allows a 10-meter or 32-foot tall structure immediately on the property line. I think that would be egregious, unfair, and wrong to the owners of the properties in the adjacent neighborhood. As shown here, you know, this is what is implied in 2 dimensions, but if we look at it in 3 dimensions, which got to do that again, we're going to be getting windows of a 10-meter tall building looking straight into your backyard with no room to do anything for transitions, as opposed to the existing case, which has the 45-degree angular plane from grade. And I did these myself, and I'm a very good drawer. You can see that that leaves space there for something to be done to affect that transition. We believe that that's the appropriate thing. It should be in the official plan, and this change that is being proposed should not be allowed.
Okay. Thanks very much, Mr. Chapnick. And we did, I do believe we have your letter as part of the correspondence, and it has a little bit more detail as well. So yeah, thank you.
I think I get a few more minutes to speak to 18.4.
You do. You'll be back with us shortly. Thank you. Okay, so the next person that we have speaking tonight is speaking to us virtually, Mr. Lee. I see you on the screen there. So you've got 5 minutes as well to present to council. Go ahead, sir.
Good evening, everyone. My name is John Lee, and I will address 2 issues tonight. First is the angular plan policy change. I believe they are not appropriate and request to discard those changes. Slide 2, please. You can see from this slide, you can see very clearly that the proposed change push a mountain directly against the property line of a 2-story home. Yes, the developer will gain 3 additional stories, but the residents completely lose privacy in their backyards. One side will lose the sun forever. No one wants to live in such a depressive environment. So please stop this policy. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Over the past few years, Richmond Hill planning team has created a number of measures that benefit developers. The first action was to remove the height limit in Young Bernard KDA. As far as we know, this is the only secondary plan in Canada with no height restrictions, echoing the call for the sky is the limit, which results in at the center of this KDA can build 70-story towers over 200 meters high. The only height control is the 45-degree angular plan. So if we change the angular plan as a policy right now, it will make this disaster KDA plan even more difficult to control. What we have learned from the Young Bernard KTA plan, next slide, please. What we have learned from the Young Bernard KTA plan over the past 6 years is that if our planning team had listened once, we won't have this disaster KTA plan we have today. I just have one example. This KTA plan has over 5,000 apartment units, but they are all planned based on 1,200 square feet each. Anyone with common sense should know, in today's market, the average condo unit size is much smaller than 1,200 square feet. We provide many historic, marketing, and planning data, and tried many times to convince the KDA team to use real-world data, but they refused, and also refused to provide the data source until the LPAT court hearing. The KDA team told the court that 1,200 square feet per unit was based on York Region's intensification plan guide. We were shocked, but it's true. The court accepted KDA team's evidence, and we lost in LPAT. A few months later, I contacted York Region planning team and was told that the condo unit size was based on a survey of 18 apartment projects in York Region. Then I spent a few months to investigate those 18 projects one by one. I collect all the data. The result was shocking and embarrassing. Next slide, please. It was our Richmond Hill planners who don't understand the most basic planning terminology caused this stupid mistake. Among the 18 condo projects, 3 biggest ones are from Richmond Hill. And I think the Beverly Hill is one of them. For this Beverly Hill project, the GCA, gross construction area, is about 12,000 square meters. But the GFA, gross floor area for condo and mixed use, is only 69,000 square meters. But our staff confused CGA and GCA and GFA. But all 3 projects made the same mistake. This caused in York Region, the condo unit size was on average 1,200 units, not 800. The planning density of Young Bernard has surpassed Young Eglinton due to our KDA planning team's great contribution. Developers can now build 50% more residential units on top of that hyper density. But this part has no infrastructure support. It was too hard for our planning team to listen, let alone admit that they were wrong. Therefore, on behalf of Young Bernard Residents Association, we are asking Richmond Hill Council to order our planning team to discuss with Young Bernard residents how to address this indisputable error during this OP update. This is not a planning issue. This is a human error. You guys planned 50% more than it should be. This is a very stupid mistake. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Lee, thank you very much. Okay, so at this time, we will bring it back to council. I see Councillor Pirelli. I think you have your virtual hand up. Did you want to speak?
Yes, yeah, since I'm only participating audio, I'll put up my virtual hand to speak. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I wanted to ask Mr. Crawford offered to answer any questions. I'd like to take this opportunity to ask a few questions, if that's okay, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, of course.
Thank you. So through you to Mr. Crawford. Thank you, Mr. Crawford. Excellent presentation. I know there's a lot of information in there. Mr. Crawford, you've heard the delegates speak compassionately about an issue that to me has always caused a little bit of confusion in the public, and that is this angular plane. It was suggested that in a couple of drawings, were you watching the gentleman in the, okay, were those drawings presented by the city? Or were those drawings presented by the delegate?
Through you, Mr. Chair. There were a couple of drawings in Mr. Chapnick's presentation that I believe were prepared by staff, and we presented to Mr. Chapnick at a meeting that we had with him and his association. Some of the drawings towards the end, I believe, were his own drawings.
So they were suggestive that if we take the angular plane, two things were said. One, if we take the angular plane from 10 meters above ground, that somehow the developments can now take place at the property line. Was that a drawing made by the city, that one that we saw there?
I can't recall off the top of my head, unfortunately, which drawing. That's one of the drawbacks of being in a virtual environment.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let me carry on. What I'm trying to say is that when we look at something like the angular plane, that's one of the planning principles. Oh, I see Mr. Ban is going to put the drawing back up. Thank you, Mr. Chapnick. Yeah, if we could just look at that for a moment, please. Really appreciate it. Those look like the same thing to me. No, it's not that one. It's the other one. It was another drawing. Anyways, let's put that aside for a second. Mr. Crawford, it has been suggested that if we take the angle, that first of all, that one, that's the one. You see, it's showing there that on the right-hand side, that the building would be actually at the property line. And could you please explain for the residents that are watching that whenever we have an application, there's always setbacks that are required. And so that the actual building on the property line would never be a realistic scenario. Could you explain that to the people watching this evening?
Through you, Mr. Chair, just very briefly, that would be roughly correct. Most of the time in zoning bylaws, there are a minimum setback from property lines that are required.
Right. And so that's why I just wanted to make sure that anybody watching here, and I needed you to confirm that, Mr. Crawford, is that, you know, the drawing on the right, now, is that a city drawing? Did we present that drawing?
Yes, I believe this is one created by city staff.
Yeah, see, that's a little bit confusing, and I can understand the frustration in the residents that are saying, hey, if you take this angular plane from 10 meters above the ground at the property line, then people are going to be able to build within that angular plane. But the reality is that there's other safeties that ensure that that doesn't take place. And thank you for explaining that. The second statement that was made, Mr. Crawford, was that you stated that you were going to clarify the angular plane in the new OPA. And it was suggested that you're making changes. And I know that we've very often taken the angular plane from 10 meters above the ground. Could you elaborate on that, please, for the residents that believe that we're trying to make changes?
Through you, Mr. Chair, there are certain circumstances in the official plan policies right now, and sorry, I can't recall them the direct quote of the policies off the top of my head. I think there are a couple of circumstances where the 10 meters, the angular plane would be measured from 10 meters above grade. The reason that we're proposing this change right now is to make it a little bit more, make the application of that a little bit more consistent. And as well, it's just as a principle of fairness for any properties that have the designation separation across a road, which is automatically, a 20 meter minimum distance, which is the width of that road.
So to you, Mr. Crawford, that, that's in your expertise, that's all sounds great, but you can understand how it's a little bit frustrating for others that don't have the experience that you and I do when you're speaking about these topics. To summarize, would it be safe to say that we already have it in our policy that in certain circumstances, we do take the angular plane from 10 meters above ground, and you simply want to make it clear in our OPA update exactly how that's going to be taking place? Is that correct, Mr. Crawford?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I believe that's roughly correct. We're just clarifying the language around it a little bit.
Okay, I just wanted to be clear on that we're not, the staff isn't trying to pull a wool and a fast one and changing the rules, behind the residents' backs, because that's absolutely not correct. The last question I have before my time runs out, and I apologize if I don't have that information at the ready, Mr. Crawford, but would you be able to explain in the official plan amendment what we're doing about the flood zone that starts at Young and Elgin Mills and the flood remediation that we've been talking about for years? Is that part of the plan as well?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I don't believe that there are any changes being proposed through OPA 18.3 with any direction towards the flood remediation area, I think is the proper term. Sorry, I'm quoting off the top of my head again.
That's okay.
But the area around Elgin Mills, I don't believe at this point through this official plan amendment that there are any changes to those policies.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Crawford. Excellent presentation. Thank you. Those are my questions, Mr. Chairman. I'm happy to move all comments be referred back to staff for consideration.
Okay, that's what I was going to ask. Thank you very much. I see Councillor Barros wants to speak, so you can be our second person. Councillor Barros, will you be willing to second that?
I'll second that we receive all comments and direct them back to staff, including the large amount of correspondence.
Thank you very much. Go ahead.
I just wanted to first start off by saying that in reference to the correspondence that we've received, it's very specific to the Oak Ridges area. And as you know, I mean, I've taken liberties with a little north, a little nicer. And that really does speak to the Oak Ridges community. And I think it's important. I'm 100% in lockstep with the residents that have come forward with the correspondence that Oak Ridges is a unique place within the city of Richmond Hill, and as thus deserves to be continually protected against the type of development that we would see in the south. And for those that may be watching for the first time, that's why I've continued to support development in the south, so that we allow the opportunity for people to move to this great city. We know we have to accept them. There's no choices there. They're coming regardless. The province says so. The federal government says so. But the Oak Ridges community, it's not Yonge and Highway 7. It is not deserving of those types of densities. So again, I'm in lockstep with the residents. I'm 100% with them in making sure that this level of protection for Oak Ridges is there. And other than that, this official plan amendment update, there's an awful lot of updates there. And I think that they're timely and they're needed, and it'll help provide more assurance for residents when they individually go to do things in the city also. And those are my comments for today. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll comment more again probably at the meeting when this is actually on the floor. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Is there anybody else? Councillor Shepherd, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to Mr. Crawford. Mr. Crawford, Mr. Chapnick made a delegation in which he expressed that there are changes that are being proposed to the angular plane policy. Your presentation stated that these are clarifications. Could you, and in response to Mr. Pirelli's questions, Councillor Pirelli, you did offer some clarification, but for the purposes of the conversation, could you clarify a bit more what the changes are and how they might impact future development?
Through you, Mr. Chair, if I could just maybe pass over to my colleague Chun Chu, who's assisting me on this official plan amendment. She has a little bit more background on some of the changes that she might be able to explain in better words than I can.
Go ahead, Ms. Chu.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was wondering if council would indulge me by letting me share my screen to further clarify what those angular plane policies speak to.
Sure, that would be helpful. Go ahead.
Okay,
you can do that from where you are?
Let me try it out. Yes, I believe I can.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, sorry, just give me 1 minute. Okay, could you see my screen?
Yep, we certainly can. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for your question, Councillor Shepherd. And what you see on the screen is what we have shared with Brian Chapnick from the Village Core Residents Association. So the current policy in the official plan has this image in the official plan. And it basically speaks to how transition of density or height and density occurs when there is a public street that separates the neighborhood designation from the center or corridor designation. And so what you see here is the angular plane applied at grade, and it starts at the lot line of the neighborhood lot, and it goes at 45-degree angle. And so what you see here is two examples. On the left is a high-rise proposed development. On the right is a 3 to 4 story townhouse development. And so the angular plane for both examples happen at grade, and it applies 45 degrees. And to note is that what is notable is that there is a public street that separates the two land use designations. So in the next slide, what we have here is an example where it becomes a challenge when there is no street separation that occurs between the neighborhood designation and the corridor designation. And this kind of example actually happens in numerous areas around the city. As an example here, this area is west of Yonge Street and north of Major Mackenzie Drive. And here, what you see here, the brown is the corridor designation, a regional mixed-use corridor. And the yellow, what you see here, is the neighborhood designation. And if you look at this particular area here, there's no street separation. So in this case, if we were to apply the current official plan policy on the 45-degree angular plane, we would again apply it at the lot line of the lot in the neighborhood at grade at a 45-degree angular plane. And when we do that, what you see is that the high-rise or mid-rise development actually needs to shift over a little bit more deeper into the corridor designation in order to accommodate the 45-degree angular plane. On the right-hand side, where you see a 3 to 4 story townhouse development, if the angular plane is applied at grade again, the building would actually protrude the 45-degree angular plane. And the only way to meet the current policy is actually to shift this townhouse development over more deeper into the corridor designation. So what we see is that it is an issue because in terms of equity, if you have a 2-story townhouse here, on the one side flanking this dwelling is a 2-story house, but then on the other side there's a gap, so you can't really develop anything within this gap, and so one is that it's not optimizing the use of, I guess, land, but also if a 2 to 3 story structure is permitted on one side of the dwelling, the question raises, why can't another 2 to 3 story structure also be permitted on the other side of this dwelling that's flanking the other side? And so, this is what we're trying to address in the proposed OPA 18.3. So what we're showing here in the last slide is that we're applying a 10 meter height in between the neighborhood and the corridor designation. And then at the height of that 10 meter, then the 45-degree angular plane is actually applied. And this 10 meter height is important, and I emphasize a 10 meter, is because it represents a 2 to 3 story structure. And that is pretty much the standard structure or standard height in a neighborhood designation. And so what you see then at the 45-degree angular plane as it applied in the high-rise or mid-rise development, you could occur a little bit closer to the lot line. And similarly, for the 3 to 4 story townhouse, it could occur a little bit closer to the lot line. But you can see that the height is actually continuous, along the neighborhood designation to the edge of the corridor designation. I hope that helps explain what our policy is trying to propose.
Thanks very much. Back to you, Councillor Shepherd.
Yes, thank you very much for the explanation. Thank you, Mr.
Okay, is there anybody else that would like to speak? Councillor Chan, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, staff, for the brief but very comprehensive presentation. In particular, the staff report that was provided was certainly very informative. And thank you for the 2 delegates who make submissions. Now, much have been talking about the angular plane, so and staff will explain on this particular thing that I'm not going to further elaborate. I do want to compliment staff in terms of the 2 hierarchy, both intensification. I think is helpful for members of public, also the development industry and everyone involved, is that what kind of expectation of the level intensification, like the inverted triangle, Richmond Hill Center and all the way down. And on the other hand, he's talking about the mobility hierarchy. And of course, that the single-use vehicle would be really at the lower end. And I think one thing I'm glad to see that is on the top that I saw, although it's just image iconic, but people who have mobility challenges, like using the wheelchair, other means also put on the top. And I hope that along with that the city would be adopting in the end the age-friendly community strategy with that kind of continuation, active living, active part of the planning process into the OP concept in here. Now, I'm also glad to see that something that I always strongly believe is that about the role of public art. And I'm glad to see that the OPA also have specific percentage set out for that for public art in the city from the official planning perspective, as well as the changes in the climate change, reflecting what Council has approved last spring on really talking about we have a new plan in terms of emission for the community and so on. Now, one aspect is a question through Mr. Chair to Mr. Crawford. I understand there is a new chapter to be put in called, I believe, implementation, because this is still trying to be amending the in-force OP, which was actually 2010, correct? I see the nodding. So how would that section, chapter 7, implementation in terms of helping, should it be a case either for development proposal or at OLT proceeding? For you, Mr. Chair.
Back through you, Mr. Chair. So the specific policy that is going in section 7.1 dealing with implementation will basically serve as a point of clarification, because since we're doing this official plan update through multiple official plan amendments, there is going to be a bit of a lag time between when kind of the overarching city structure, which is being done through OPA 18.3, and then when some of the more area-specific policies, such as the ones that may focus on height and density, and some of the more, roads and park structure, that sort of stuff, get dealt with through our batch 2 and our batch 3 OPAs, which we would be looking to bring forward in 2023. So the purpose of this policy is just to make sure that until such time that we get to the more area-specific planning, that the current policies of the official plan dealing with individual sites and specifically the individual land use designations on those sites, that the current policies continue to apply until we have finished the update.
Thank you. Yeah, because it seems to me, and you kind of confirm it, is that I'm seeing this is that incremental approach to amend and update the 12-year young official plan before we actually get to the final a newly amended OP maybe a year from now. So I take it that is what that transitional kind of things that help the city insofar as making it clear. So I got it. Thank you. Now, one perhaps last thing I want to get some clarification is that because the York region is also mentioned in the report, is also going through the MCR, the Municipal Comprehensive Review, would the staff at this point in time have high degree of confidence that they would be very much in alignment with the regional OP, which is undergoing changes as well, through Mr. Chair? I hope the answer is yes.
Answering through you again, Mr. Chair. Yes, staff have actively been reviewing the regions of the draft regional official plan and have been working with regional staff. We are fairly confident that there are going to be no conflicts or no issues with the regional official plan, and that OPA 18.3 is in alignment with it. Because the official plan, the regional official plan has not yet been updated, many of our conformity pieces will be holding off until our batch 2 official plan amendment, which will occur after regional plan adoption. But these are mostly going to be amendments that are either in line with the current regional official plan or will not conflict with any regional policies from that perspective.
Thank you. On that one, maybe a supplementary is I'm citing one specific example, the mass transit station area, MTSA. So that would very much have to be obviously in alignment with the transportation demand study, the TMP, I think that's called in both the region, notwithstanding the city official plan. Is it not the case? So that certainly MTSA would have quite an impact on the future in terms of how the alignment with both the city as well as the regions. I'm just citing as a specific example, right? Shabelle is nodding. Is it something you want to add to Mr. Crawford or no? For you, Mr. Chair.
Yes. So the specific boundaries of the major transit station areas will be part of our batch 2 official plan or our official plan amendments because we need to wait for the region to adopt the boundaries before we can adopt them ourselves. However, speaking in a broad sense, the city structure that is being proposed in Schedule A, the changes to Schedule A1 and all the city structure elements generally do align with the proposed locations of major transit station areas.
Okay, it's comfortable to hear that. So thank you very much for the responses from our staff, and thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Just for your information, tomorrow at the region, we will be talking more about the regional official plan. So if after this meeting you're still craving talk about official plans, you're welcome to satisfy those cravings by listening to the regional official plan talk tomorrow. So I see you smiling, so I think you'll probably be there. That's great. So I will make some comments here unless there's anybody else that would like to comment on the first round. Thank you very much to staff for all the work that you've done on this. I mean, it goes back a lot earlier, obviously, than this presentation tonight. We've been talking about official plans now for quite some time. I thank you for all of the public input opportunities and sessions and so on that you've done up to this point. And I know there's a lot more work still to do. A couple of things, and there's just a ton of stuff in here that I think is positive, and it's improvements on the current official plan. I do appreciate all the work that is referenced in this official plan about affordable housing. I think that's obviously very important, and that's on almost everybody's mind right now. And this official plan will go some distance in helping us with that, I think. I do appreciate the implementation of some of our climate change, things in our community energy and emissions plan that are going to be kind of crystallized and solidified in this official plan. And I think that's great. I encourage that to continue. I do also agree with Councillor Barros. I think that, there was Oak Ridges and the transit corridor in Oak Ridges along Yonge Street needs to be looked at very, very carefully. I don't see any need whatsoever to be putting in high density, high rise type building in there for a number of reasons. I mean, it is, that is part of what makes Oak Ridges unique, and I completely agree with that. Then there's the added concerns with Oak Ridges moraine and all of the, the naturally occurring features that happen in that area that I think we need to be very ultra cognizant of. And so I think we really need to be taking a very close look at what we will allow along that corridor. I think the final thing I'd just like to say too is the 45-degree angular plane has always been problematic for me. I think if it's used as one of the tools in the toolbox, that's fine. But we tend to be relying on it a lot. And I guess at the end of the day, the main objective here, whether we use angular plane or we use other tools or we use tools in concert together, the idea is to keep big things away from small things. And, you know, I can totally understand in a number of areas in Richmond Hill that are bordering on corridor areas where we have established really dynamic, beautiful neighborhoods. And we're going to be putting much bigger density, or relatively speaking anyway, in close proximity to that. And, you know, we have to do everything that we can with policies, including 45-degree angular plane and others if necessary, to protect that. And I also understand that the official plan will work in concert with zoning bylaws that will add clarity to that and setbacks and all that kind of thing. But I think we need to set a strong foundation in the official plan. And I think that we really need to be taking a look at the angular plane policies and making sure that we are providing the buffer zone between the, you know, edges of the established neighborhoods and the corridor areas. So I've talked to staff a lot about this, and I know that, you know, this is a time for input from both the public and from council. So that would be my input. I would encourage staff to take a close look at areas like what Mr. Chapnick is describing, and I can think of others as well, that really need that added level of protection. So I want that to happen. I'm going to expect to see that in the final document. And I think that there are some further discussions and probably some compromises that need to be made in order to achieve that. Again, I just want to thank the staff for the work that you've done on this. And as I said, you know, we're not at the end of the process by any stretch here. You know, but we're getting closer to the finish line, and I think that's a positive thing. So with that, we have a motion on the floor, unless anybody wants to speak on a second round. Seeing none. So all those in favor of referring all comments back to staff?
Yes.
Okay, that carries. Thank you very much.
Was that unanimous, Mr. Chairman?
It's hard to tell with, but I think that's probably the case, yes. If you're, I think I heard Councillor Stilovitz, and I think I heard you, so that would be unanimous.
Thank you.
Okay, so the next item on the agenda is a request for comments on the next draft official plan amendment 18.4 with neighborhoods. And I see Mr. DeFreitas here to speak to us about that before we bring it back to council. So go ahead, Brian.
Thank you very much, Mayor West. And if I could have the clerk please put the presentation up on the screen. Okay, thank you very much. And good evening, Mayor West, members of council, and members of the public. This next item deals with proposed draft official plan amendment 18.4 to the city's official plan, which deals with neighborhoods. This amendment is being initiated by the city and is one of two draft amendments before you this evening for public and stakeholder input related to the city's official plan update. Next slide, please. The Neighborhoods OPA proposes changes to the city's OP to address concepts noted in the Key Directions report related to urban structure and employment from a neighborhood's perspective. These updates address matters related to the development of 15-minute complete communities and introduce new permissions for gentle density within the neighborhood designation, while also including policies to respect distinguishing features of neighborhoods. Next slide, please. There are a number of policy objectives advanced through this amendment. Firstly, the proposed OPA addresses permissions for community amenities that support neighborhoods and residents' day-to-day activities. Some of the changes addressed include expanding permissions for home occupations so that they're no longer limited to a professional or office use, clarifying permissions for where live-work units can locate, expanding permissions for locating neighborhood commercial sites along arterial streets, and clarifying policies regarding the retention of existing commercial space, and relaxing criteria for community uses such as public schools and private schools to locate within neighborhoods. And these changes are addressed in sections 2.2.1 to 2.2.3 and section 2.2.5 of the OPA. Second, the amendment also advances direction to diversify the city's housing stock, promote development within priority infill areas, and provide more housing options to suit the various lifestyles and incomes that exist in the city. It does this by enabling permissions for missing middle housing and gentle density. The city recognizes that the work from the affordable housing strategy has shown that there is an affordability problem, and there is not enough of missing middle housing types to satisfy the needs of current and future residents in Richmond Hill. The proposed changes to the OP to address this are set out in section 2.2.4 of the OPA. Next slide, please. In addition, the amendment also includes revised policies that speak to medium density residential development within neighborhoods. The OP speaks to the provision of more dense housing types within neighborhoods, such as townhouses, triplexes, and walk-up apartments subject to criteria. This is referred to in the official plan as medium density housing. The plan provides specific criteria for how and where these forms of dwellings can be accommodated within neighborhoods. Through OPA 18.4, there are a number of key changes that are proposed in relation to these housing types to facilitate their development in locations that are well suited for them. These are highlighted in green text on the slide, and they include 1, direction for medium density to occur into the interior of neighborhoods. And a key change here is to shift the onus of preparing a study to support this form of development from a process that's initiated by the city to one that's now initiated by a proponent, and require that that study be approved by council. And 2, enabling direction that would permit medium density to occur on lands that abut a center or a corridor designation where supported by a concept plan approved by council. And the OPA also would include new direction to permit medium density where it has been identified by an infill study or a tertiary plan that was previously undertaken by the city and approved by council. Next slide, please. And another important element addressed through this OPA in terms of housing is the provision of missing middle housing, which I alluded to earlier. Presently, the city's official plan permits singles, semis, and duplexes in most of the city's residential areas. However, to address housing affordability and the need for more housing options, OPA 18.4 introduces new permissions to enable multi-attached dwellings, which is a concept introduced through the city's affordable housing strategy. And multi-attached dwellings are multi-unit dwellings that contain 3 or more units. This concept involves utilizing existing supply of single detached and semi-detached housing lots and applying the current zoning provisions that apply to them. And from the outside, the context of the dwelling generally does not change. However, on the inside of the home, there are walls that partition and separate additional units. And this concept builds upon the city's secondary suites policy, also known as additional residential units, which is in the OP and was adopted by council and came into effect last year. And with respect to the proposed policy framework, OPA 18.4 proposes several options for how multi-attached housing could be enabled, including permitting them through new buildings or through a conversion of existing single detached or semi-detached dwellings, or permitting them only through the conversion of an existing single detached or semi-detached dwelling, i.e. no new builds. And in terms of location, 2 options are considered. 1, we could allow multi-attached dwelling as of right anywhere within neighborhoods, or this form of housing could be limited to certain geographic areas. And the proposed modifications which would enable multi-attached dwellings are set out in section 2.2.4.4 of the OPA. Next slide, please. OPA 18.4 also includes direction which aims to balance the city's desire of diversifying its housing options with the requirement for new development to respect the distinguishing features of neighborhoods. To address this direction, the OPA includes policies requiring proponents who propose significant development to identify distinguishing features which can be physical, social, and/or economic qualities of an area, and to demonstrate how their proposed development is compatible and complements those features. And the consideration of distinguishing physical features can include multiple things. For instance, the relationship to public buildings and parks, the patterns of streets, the heights and scale and density of nearby properties and dwellings, the size and configuration of lots, setbacks and the patterns of yards, mature trees, and the conservation of heritage buildings, structures, and landscapes. Next slide, please. This slide highlights the official plan amendment process timeline. Presently, we are at the point of the statutory council public meeting. Council should be aware that the draft official plan amendment has been circulated to prescribed bodies as required under the Planning Act for review and has been uploaded to the city's website where it's been available since April 7th. And consultation with the public, stakeholders, landowners, and agencies has been occurring since the release of the draft and will continue into early June. At this council public meeting, staff have presented the draft proposed official plan amendment for feedback from council, the public, stakeholders, and agencies. Following this council meeting, staff will synthesize the feedback heard from the public and the stakeholders and revise the draft OPA if necessary to bring it forward to council for adoption in late June. And once adopted, staff will then submit that OPA to the approval authority for approval. The city will also post the revised OPA on its website and provide notification to those persons who have requested that they be notified and added to the notification list. Next slide, please. And so the purpose of the staff report that's before you today is to provide council and the public with an overview of the draft proposed official plan amendment, and it has been structured for information purposes only, with a recommendation that all comments be referred back to staff for consideration. So this concludes my presentation on OPA 18.4 for this evening, and I'm happy to address any questions from members of council. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So we have a couple of delegations and 3 pieces of correspondence from actually the same people who are delegating. So the first person that's here with us this evening again is Mr. Chapnick. If you want to come and speak to us, you've got 5 minutes, and we've got a couple more people after that virtually. So go ahead, Mr. Chapnick, whenever you're all ready.
Okay, it's the screen up again. I'm going to put this drawing back up again. And the reason I'm putting this back up again is because it applies also is one of our concerns when it comes to the OPA on neighborhoods is related to this angular plane policy because that is one of the mechanisms that is used to ensure transitions. The big change in this official plan policy is the change to neighborhoods. In the OP targets the increasing inclusion of medium density building forms, as Mr. Freitas described, in gentle density, in priority infill areas, which can occur all over the place. So we're going to start seeing a lot more of these blocks of townhomes being allowed everywhere throughout neighborhoods in Richmond Hill. And people should be aware of that. In predominantly single-family neighborhoods, this is a permission for alternative building forms to be inserted in the neighborhood. Accordingly, the most important thing, in our opinion as residents, is transitions to the adjacent neighborhood. And this is addressed a little bit in kind of subjective terms in this OP. It says the development will respect the character and distinguishing features of neighborhoods and shall be context sensitive and compatible with adjacent and surrounding areas with respect to the following. It gives a list of things, one of them being massing, including consideration of height, scale, density, and dwelling types of nearby residential properties, and patterns of front, rear, and side yard setbacks and landscape open spaces. Okay, so what does that imply? How are we going to respect patterns of front, rear, and side yard setbacks and landscaped open spaces when we have a medium density built form coming in the property next door? Well, the answer to that worries me because the planning staff and councillors like Councillor Pirelli believe that, this measuring the angular plane from 10 meters above grade is compatible and there's no problem with it and that everyone will be protected. So there's no specificity here in this OPA of how we're going to transition to adjacent single-family homes in the middle of a neighborhood with a medium density form. Are we proposing the same angular plane policy that's being proposed in 18.3, where we're going to put 33-foot buildings on the property line, or sorry, maybe I've amended a little bit my figure here, because yes, there are setbacks to a property line that are required in a zoning bylaw. Usually those setbacks are about 2 meters or maybe 3 meters. The angular plane policy at 10 meters above grade and then 45 degrees just adds that to the 10 meters. So if you're back 2 meters from the property line, you can now build 12 meters high at 2 meters from the property line. So what Councillor Pirelli said about being protected by setbacks in a zoning bylaw, absolutely untrue. You will not be protected by the standard setbacks in a zoning bylaw. The only protection that residents can count on is to have a reasonable angular plane policy or a minimum setback in the official plan. If this is left to a zoning bylaw, the Committee of Adjustments will shrink it arbitrarily for every single application, as they do across the board, and make thousands of residents in Richmond Hill unhappy. And we know that happens all the time. So that is not the way to ensure that the residents are protected for new development and intensification coming into Richmond Hill. There has to be more thought to how transitions are affected. It has to be reflected in reasonable angular plane policies, maybe setback policies as well, maybe height restrictions, maybe all of these things work together in some way. I agree the angular plane isn't the only way, but it is one way to ensure that there's appropriate transitions to existing neighborhoods, whether it's to adjacent corridor or center, or whether it's to single family homes in the middle of a neighborhood, because that's what's coming. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So the next person we have is Tak Amiri from Xenix Incorporated, owner of 189 Center Street East. Do we have, oh, there we are. Hi, Tak, how are you? Oh, you're on mute, sir. Tak, you're on mute.
On mute now?
Yeah, we can hear you now. So
Right.
You've got 5 minutes to address council, and welcome to be here. Go ahead.
Right. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor and the councillors. Yes, my concern is about the neighborhood proposed designation for a strip of land or a block of properties west of the railway, north of Center Street East. Now, all the way to Pugsley, which is on the north, is limited to Belvedere Crescent. Now, that strip is mainly, there's one land which I own it at exactly at the railway line and abutting the railway line and north of Center Street. But the rest of it to the west of my land are a number of mainly auto shops. And those, the idea that they will be proposed to be neighborhoods, meaning that they cannot, my understanding, and I'm not a planner, not very educated in the area, but in this field, but apparently it's not high density. It cannot be high density. Now, years ago, when the official plan changed and the low density residential was allowed, I actually approached many of the owners there why don't we all collectively convert to residential. My land doesn't need to be converted because it's vacant now, but the rest, why don't we convert, why don't they actually redevelop as residential, because it would be better for the neighborhood. And the answer was almost unanimously, whoever I spoke to, is that it's just not worth it. It doesn't make sense. That's at low density, which is the detached, semi-detached, and duplex. It didn't make sense for any of them because this redevelopment would mean that the owners have to wait until all the leases are expired. Then, because these are auto shops or industrial workshops, they have to now go through an extensive remediation or environmental remediation assessment, which takes a very, very long time, and for a long time indecisive process. then remediate whenever it's necessary. And for all of this time, they have to do without the rent, and they have to basically, and then when they build, it's going to be building, low density. Now, the proposal that is going to be slightly higher than low density and more densities are going to be allowed, that's welcome, that's good, that's a positive step. However, it is, if I have gone through the calculations, putting myself in the shoes of somebody who is the owner there, and it still doesn't make financial sense. And as long as it doesn't make financial, it is not financially viable. Don't forget, right now, the owners there are earning, they're not enjoying capital gains, but also earning very high rents for buildings which are run down and written off. There is no cost to the building. There is no more writing off of the building itself. So they're earning a very high rent on the land alone, perhaps. So for them to sacrifice all that and go through all the risks and all those costs and be without rent for so long, it just wouldn't make sense. Now, these are not my lands, but the point is, unless those people are incentivized to develop as residential, it will be very difficult for my land to decide to go residential, because it will be any residences on my land to the east end of this strip will be downgraded because of all this derelict auto shops which are there. Now, high density is quite possible if you look at it without even, because one side of it is Center Street, and this strip is wide enough that if you move the actual building close to the Center Street, there will be quite a distance to the neighbors, and because there's also Belvedere, the neighbors will be distant from any building by not just the backyard of these buildings, but also the Center Street. So all of this means that I think the only way we could incentivize those people to redevelop into residential is to allow higher densities than is currently being proposed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Amiri. Our last delegate tonight is Jack Dugan from Markets on Main Street, representing the owner of Zexton Incorporated at 189 Center Street East. Mr. Dugan. Mr. Dugan, I can see you on the screen, but your name, but I can't see you, and you seem to be mute. Oh.
Okay.
There you go.
Okay, good. Good evening, Mr. Mayor and members of council. I did submit a 5-page letter, and so I won't go over that letter with you, but rather to give you the executive summary. I also won't duplicate the comments that my client, Mr. Amiri, has just made to you. In the past, we've made several submissions to the official plan update, expressing the reasons why this property should be included in the Newkirk local area plan. To date, we've not received any indication that our submissions have been taken into consideration, or alternatively, any reasons why our submissions have not been accepted. We now find that draft OPA 18.4 proposes to include the Zexton land within the neighborhood policies of the plan, and therefore not within the Newkirk local area policies. We feel that to exclude this land from the Newkirk local area amendment would be inconsistent with the provincial policy statement, the growth plan, the regional plan, and the stated intent of your own official plan update. We therefore strongly object to the draft OPA 18.4 as currently written. As you know, the provincial policy statement, the growth plan, and the regional plan all require that the areas around transit stations be planned for efficient use of public infrastructure, and that development around these stations be intensified. What we don't see in OPA 13.4, 3 or 4 is an intensification target that is to be achieved. As you're also aware, I'm sure, the major transit station area is considered to be the area within a walking distance of 500 to 800 meters from the transit station. The Zexton land and the adjacent industrial properties on both sides of Center Street west of the CN line are all within 500 meters of the Richmond Hill GO station and should obviously be included within the Newkirk local area plan to be consistent with the intent of the provincial policy statement, the growth plan, and the regional plan. It's the intent of the growth plan that significant intensification take place by 2031. What we see in the Newkirk local area plan are major apartment buildings that can at best add a few ground-related units, existing industrial units, some of which may not be willing to relocate for a very long time, and GO station parking lots that can be replaced by parking structures to free up land for new housing, but that's likely to require plans of subdivision to create new roads and is unlikely to happen within a short time frame. Probably the only piece of land that can be developed in the short term is the Zexton land, and it's not included in the Newkirk local area plan. It seems that there's very little potential for the new plan to achieve any of the significant intensification around the major transit station by the target date of 2031. I don't want to duplicate what Mr. Amiri has said to you. With regard to the Zexton property, I'd like to point out that the narrow width of the site makes low density residential development very difficult and may be economically prohibitive. So in conclusion, in order to be consistent with the intent of the provincial policy statement, the growth plan and the regional plan, we propose that the lands on both sides of Centre Street, west of the CN line, be included in the Newkirk local centre. The land use designation of these lands should also provide for higher densities, which can realistically result in the redevelopment of these properties. We therefore strongly object to the fact that these properties were not included in OPA 18.3, and that the inclusion of lands on both sides of the Centre Street have been designated neighborhood as shown on draft OPA 18.4. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Dugan. So bring this back to council. Councillor Pirelli and Councillor Silovitz, you're next. Go ahead, Councillor Pirelli.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for the delegates again. Of course, I'll be moving that all comments and correspondence be referred to staff for consideration. Mr. DeFreitas, you heard one of the delegates speak about the angular plane in the neighborhoods. I don't know if you're the one to explain this a little better for them, but maybe someone on staff could explain that within the neighborhood designation, the angular plane doesn't apply. Could you explain that, please, for our viewers?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that is generally correct. The angular plane is, for the most part, not applied within the neighborhood designation. However, there have been, I believe, some instances where that has occurred, where we may be dealing with an existing condition where there happens to be an existing high density building that wants to expand or whatnot, where generally the urban design principle is applied. But generally speaking, it's not applied.
Right. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. DeFreitas. I always like to ask a question that I already know the answer to, just for clarification, because Mr. Chapnick suggested that I was being disingenuous. And the truth is I was not, Mr. Chapnick. You heard Mr. DeFreitas state that the angular plane really doesn't apply in this new neighborhood OPA recommendations. The lands, this is part of the official plan update that really scares me the most. You know, we've heard the residents speak about, you know, the transition from high density to neighborhoods, and we've had lengthy discussions about the angular plane and where it should be taken from. And this is one of those where be careful what you ask for. If the residents of Richmond Hill don't want intensification that is reasonable on the major transit routes and in the key development areas and major transit service areas, this is what's going to happen. In order to meet our intensification goals, we have to do something like this. I can tell you that I have never, ever seen someone apply to put a larger home in a neighborhood, a single family home, and not meet with resistance from the neighborhood. I've seen that all the way from Oak Ridges to the south, to the east, and to the west of Richmond Hill, and every municipality in the GTA and Ontario for that matter. People don't like change sometimes. Now we're going to say, forget about that monster home that's going next door to you. That monster home now is going to be large monster type home, but now it's going to have 6 apartments in it, 6 families living there, 6 problems with parking, 6 problems with traffic, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, ladies and gentlemen, be careful what you ask for. When you keep fighting the intensification along Yonge Street, where the subway is going to be, this is what happens. And this scares me more than anything. Mr. Chairman, these are my comments to staff. You really have to nail this one down. I understand the province is frustrated, and the province has suggested that by rights, you get up to 4 stories as part of their new legislative changes. If that were to happen, I think that would be disastrous for our established neighborhoods. Imagine a nice bungalow sitting on a beautiful lot with a 50 or 60-foot frontage, and next door they're going to put a 4-story building, even including the regular setbacks, because there will be no angular plane applied to it. You can't. If you applied the angular plane from even 10 stories up, you wouldn't be able to build anything above 2 or 3 stories. So this scares me a lot, Mr. DeFrays. So I'll be looking intensely at your recommendations, staff's recommendations regarding this type of infill ideas to make things more affordable, what they call the missing middle. But a lot of fancy slogans here, but I don't think that people really understand that that house next to you could turn into a 6-plex, and it could be 4 stories up. That is very scary. So I'll be watching closely. Again, I move that all comments and correspondence be referred back to staff for consideration. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Silvitz.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll second that. I just have a couple of comments here. First of all, thank you to staff for their comprehensive work on this. Thank you to the delegates and to everybody who presented their side of this. This is a very difficult issue, and I completely sympathize with the residents and their concerns. And I also want to say that I support Mr. Chapnick's concerns, Mr. Lee's concerns, and they must be addressed. However, the problem lies in, and I would like to ask through you to Mr. De Freitas, when it comes to the Planning Act, and I'm sorry I don't have my my video on right now. Please accept my apologies, but I just can't do it right now. Mr. De Freitas, through you, Mr. Mayor, Mr. De Freitas, help me understand and help the residents understand if you can, please. According to the Planning Act, according to the provincial policy statement, according to the growth plan, is there anything definitive within those documents, especially the Planning Act, that specifically advocate for a 45-degree angular plane?
Mr. De Freitas?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the councillor. I'm going off the top of my head here without having the Planning Act open, but
yeah,
to my knowledge, nothing specifically, but there may be language in the provincial policies that do speak to it in a more broad sense in terms of appropriate urban design, respecting character of complete communities, of neighborhoods. But to my knowledge, I don't believe that there's an explicit reference to a 45-degree angular plane.
Thank you. I think that's very important. And Mr. De Freitas, through you, Mr. Mayor, Mr. De Freitas, when you refer to urban design, is urban design appealable at the OLT?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the councillor, I think to answer your question in an easy way, it really depends. If we're talking about official plan policy, then the answer would be yes, because it's a statutory document, and unless there's explicit permissions brought down by the province that shelters that from appeal, then it would be subject to appeal from an official plan point of view.
Okay, thank you. So where I do differ with Mr. Lee, respectfully, is that I don't agree with his assessment of how our staff have approached this. While there may be some areas here that we can certainly tighten up, I do believe that our staff are approaching this in an effective and completely legitimate manner. So I just wanted to state that. And I asked these questions and I want it on the record because it's what's in the Planning Act, it's what's in the provincial policy statement, so it's in the growth plan, and I think now also what's in I think it's Bill 109, the Better Homes Act, that's now been and has royal assent without any further public consultation, that if we can put specifics within our official plan, and it does become a legal document, but that legal document is appealable to the OLT. So I just want Mr. Chapnick and Mr. Lee to know, and all the other residents, that I totally agree with you. And I think that specifically our downtown core that Mr. Chapnick is trying to defend and advocate for, I completely agree. And it needs to be protected on both sides of the street, on both sides of Yonge Street, west and east. And there are major concerns with multi-attached dwellings and this middle infill as to how it's going to translate to how our inner neighborhoods look, and how infill development, which is very, very problematic at the moment, how our official plan, how our OPA amendments are going to deal with the protection of these neighborhoods, with the protection of the downtown core, for the greater good of the residents. So that's my concern, and I fully trust that our staff will do everything they possibly can to ensure that our new official plan, the official plan amendments that come with everything that's going to be contained within that document is going to be held in the greater interest of the greater good. And that means that the residents take the number one seat here, not the developers. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Okay, anybody else want to speak on this issue? Councillor Shepherd?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to make some comments with respect to the multi-attached dwellings and the proposal that we have here and the options that staff have presented. As Councillor Silovitz just reiterated, there are a lot of concerns with respect to intensification and infill that the residents have. And I think allowing these types of dwellings to be built could definitely harm the integrity of our communities that we're trying to protect. So if we were to have any proposals in the official plan, I would like it to be very restricted to specific neighborhoods and with very strict guidelines in place so that we do preserve the integrity of the neighborhoods. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Chan.
Thank you. Again, thanks for staff for the report and also presentation, and the three delegates. Like the colleagues who spoke before me, on one hand, I welcome the additional way of helping to intensify meaning through the gentle density, the kind of infill development. However, I also want to echo, particularly just Councillor Rika mentioned about, among the 4 options that are listed in the staff report and also in the presentation. Of course, we're not making a decision tonight. I would be very, very concerned and certainly would not go for then for all this over the city without really putting a kind of parameters that would truly respect the neighborhood characteristics and other structures and so on. So while on one hand is something additional tool to look at, particularly I try to address the issue of housing affordability. I'm mindful about that, particularly for seniors who might want to still stay in the neighborhood, perhaps that, could undergo some changes and we stay in where they are, as well as for younger generation who are going to be in this kind of more, the term is called missing middle housing. So we have to be very careful in terms of we are not missing something in the end when it comes to next month. I think June 27th, when we're really deciding on as the council on this matter. And I would encourage members of public that to really let us know, the planning staff, members of council about their views on this matter and general matter that we're seeking the input. Those are my comments, and thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, for me to share my comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Chan. Anybody else on the first round? Seeing none, I'll just add a couple of comments. So again, thank you, staff, for this report. I think that the reality is that the gentle density that we're talking about, and I'm not real thrilled with that term, to be honest with you, but is probably a reality that municipalities are going to have to grapple with. And I think we probably do need to find ways to allow other forms of housing to exist within our established neighborhoods. But I think the comments have been made a couple of times here tonight that I think we have to be really careful how we do that and very precise in how we do that, because I think if we allow certain types of housing to happen in a certain way in a certain area, it's going to cause disruption to the neighborhood. And I don't think that's what none of us, I'm sure, on council are trying to make that happen. And I don't think that it'll serve our residents very well. But I also do think that, it is possible in some areas to do it if we do it well. And I mean, this is the challenge I know that our planning staff is grappling with, is how do you do it and integrate it well into the community. I know on my street there is a small building. It probably has 4 or 5 units in it. It's been there since I've lived there, and it's a nice little addition to the community. It doesn't cause any disruption whatsoever, but the building was built for that. The setbacks are way more than you'd expect in this day and age. It's an older building. So I think these types of things are possible, but they need to be done with very careful policy precision. And I think unless we can see that level of policy precision in the final document that comes forward, I think, this is going to cause a point of friction. Multi-tack housing, I know, is something that we talked about at the Affordability Housing Task Force. Sorry, it wasn't the Affordability Housing Task Force. It was, I can't remember when we talk about this so often. Anyway, we talked about it a little while ago. I mean, I made a comment at that time that I think there is a possibility of seeing multi-tack housing, but in very specific geographic areas under very specific circumstances. I still believe that that's possible, but I also think that I've given this some more thought since that time and kind of looked at our housing stock in areas that would potentially be appropriate for it. And to be honest with you, I don't think there are very many opportunities to do that particular thing, multi-tack housing, well. And so I'm less enthusiastic about it now than I was before. Again, I'll leave it up to staff to take a close look at it, but my comment would be, I don't think there are that many opportunities to do it. And I think to do it well and to make it integrated well into the community. So I'd be very careful about pursuing that very much further. The problems that you run into with multi-tac housing is that it's a house, and then all of a sudden you have way more than one family living there, and you're going to have problems with parking and all kinds of other issues on that property. So I think those are the kinds of things that we need to be really careful with. But anyway, having said that, I think there are some really good things in this OPA 18.4, and I think that, you know, we're obviously moving forward with it. And I think, you know, the comments that we've got from the public up to this point and from council members tonight and some of the delegates, I think will help to move it further down the line. So I will be happy to support the motion to refer all comments back to staff. And unless there's anybody else that wants to speak on a second round, I don't see any or hear anybody. So we have a motion on the floor. So all those in favor of the motion to refer everything back to staff?
Yes.
And opposed? Okay, that carries only. All right.
Recorded vote, please.
I'm sorry?
Recorded vote. I want to know who voted against.
Okay.
You said it carries only, so that means somebody voted against it, Mr. Mayor.
I didn't hear anything from you, actually. So you are Councillor Barros, so that's why it carried only.
Okay, so let's have a recorded vote.
Okay, no problem. Mr. Clerk?
Mr. Mayor, voting on motion on the floor. Regional and Local Councillor Pirelli,
Yes.
Councillor Silovitz,
Yes.
Councillor Munch is absent. Councillor Barros. Councillor Barros, please. Councillor Barros is absent. Mayor West.
Yes.
Councillor Chan.
Yes.
Councillor Liu is absent. Councillor Shepherd.
Yes.
That motion carries unanimously.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. So at this point in time, we are looking for a motion to adjourn. Councillor Chan, seconded by Councillor Councillor Silvitz. Thank you. All those in favor?
Aye.
Yes.
Okay, that carries. Thank you very much, everybody. And thanks for those that